better. So with this, I will hand over to Ms. Marina Davidashvili, Lead International Advocacy and Partnership at the European Parliamentary Forum for Sexual and Reproductive Rights, who can give us a bit of a, let's say, comparative perspective on how different European countries are doing. Over to you, Ms. Davidashvili.
Thank you very much, dear moderator, dear colleagues. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you to present you our research. I'm also happy to see many familiar faces, and apologies in advance because some of you already seen this research. And I'm also looking forward to meeting new colleagues, new people who are new stakeholders who are working on the same issue in your country and in this context. I'm just gonna put my presentation now up. Okay, sorry. Screen sharing. Oh, it doesn't work. Oh, sorry. Here it is. I hope you can see it now. So I will just say I prepared just one small slide about our organization. We are a network of parliamentarians who from across Europe who are committed to protecting sexual and reproductive health and rights in their own countries and outside. And we are based in Brussels, our secretariat, and we currently have about 30 member groups in 30 parliaments of Europe. So we are an umbrella organization bringing together those members of parliament who want to improve lives of their citizens in terms of sexual and reproductive health and rights. And one of our activities is providing these members with comparative research. So basically the idea of this research was to bring for the decision makers an easy visualization and tool that scores and compares policies in Europe in terms of prevention of cervical cancer. And this research was completed in 2019, and we are starting to update it. And we focused on 3 areas: on primary prevention, that is vaccination; secondary prevention, screening programs, how the states are doing in terms of that; and online information, because nowadays in the era of fake news, of anti-vax movement, quite strong one, we believe that it's very important for governments to take responsibility to inform their citizens about correct and evidence-based health policies. So we had 3 headings and 9 criteria and 14 sub-criteria. I will not get into too much details about methodology, but if there are questions, I will be happy to answer that. Just one issue to mention, that this map doesn't reflect the prevalence rate or burden of disease. We just scored policies. So here we go. That's the map itself. As you can see, there is a very unequal situation in Europe, clear divide between Northern Europe, Southern Europe, and Eastern Europe. And while vaccine exists and screening technologies are available, today access is very dependent on where you live. And this leads to high incidence and mortality, especially in Eastern Europe and in Southern Europe, which could be avoided if proper policies be put in place. So what concretely do we see? We identified in Europe 11 champion countries. This is a dark green. So it's Belgium, Denmark, Ireland, UK, and others. I will now explain what this color means. And then with each color going to red, the quality of policies and their implementation diminishes. So unfortunately, we can see that most of Eastern and Southern Europe is in this right side boxes. So what are the good countries doing so well? So first of all, they have adopted national policies on HPV. You can see this here on the green. There is a national routine program on vaccination, which is for free, and boys and girls are vaccinated. And then with if you look at the more poor ones, there is sometimes a policy, but it's not funded. The vaccination is performed, but it's out of pocket, and only girls, or in the red, extremely red, there is just nothing available at all. And you have some countries in between, like yellow and orange ones. So concretely on also secondary prevention, the countries who are scoring excellently are the ones who have mature organized screening programs and that are for free. And also they have websites that are funded by the government with excellent evidence-based information, and where the citizens can learn about this. And correspondingly, in very poor countries, there is unsatisfactory information. You get it from the just Google search, some female magazines and so on, nothing really credible. And the screening is opportunistic or co-payment, or it's not available. Now I want to draw your attention to another map, which here we see the rates of disease. So it is important to know that also some countries who we scored as having good policies, sometimes it doesn't mean that the country would have low incidence. This has several reasons. For example, sometimes the country already introduced policies, but it takes time for them to be visible. It can take a decade. Or the policies are there, but they're not implemented. There is no funding, even though the law has been adopted or a policy has been adopted. So there is some discordance in between the policies and the real situation, which we have to take into consideration, of course. And here, this is a age standardized incident rate. I put here Slovakia, which is also, yeah, unfortunately, again, we note that also the burden is mainly in Eastern Europe. The highest bars are Eastern Europe, so and South and Central. So this is hopefully this will change soon. The more we work together. Again, here we can see Eastern Europe is lagging behind cervical cancer prevention program. So you can see the red bar, which is Eastern Europe, and the next one, Southern Europe. You can see it's very, very large in comparison to other parts of Europe in all age sectors of 15 to 39, 40 plus 65 as well. The general trend that we revealed is that 35 countries offer national routine programs. 17 offer vaccinations for boys and girls, 31 offer vaccine, 18 countries offer mature population-based screening programs, and 22 offer easy-to-find governmental websites. This is for 46 European countries. It's not only the EU, it's a geographical Europe, which shows that in most cases, half of countries are not performing well. So also just to say some statistics, 61,000 women are diagnosed and 26,000 almost die from the disease in Europe, while HPV vaccine is almost 100% effective in preventing HPV infections that cause cervical cancer. Also a few words just to say about, I already mentioned, but just very quickly, the champion countries are doing very well on recommendation. They have free vaccines for boys and girls. Very good secondary prevention programs and online information in all of these countries. There are very detailed public websites funded by the government about HPV and vaccine and all other necessary information. Countries that are scoring in the EU is Bulgaria, Romania, and Slovakia. It is so vaccines are mainly out of pocket, are paid. It is secondary prevention is either nascent or opportunistic. In case of Slovakia, is organized, but nascent, and there is co-payment. I have to note that this research is from 1.5 years ago. So if there are any changes, we will be updating it. And also in terms of online information, there are civil society websites, but it's not sufficient. So also outside the European Union, it is Azerbaijan and Belarus who are worst performing countries. There is no recommendation, no access to vaccine, no secondary prevention, and very unreliable, very insufficient information. There are, of course, excellent now international mechanisms that have been launched last year and this year. So it shows how the world community is motivated to eliminate cervical cancer. I'm sure we will talk about these mechanisms later on, but they all have very great goals, which we will hope we will be able to implement. Why is it important we need to work together to translate it into the evidence-based policy. So therefore we work with members of parliament, with decision makers, because parliamentarians, they can hold their governments accountable for their international commitments. They can develop legislation and policies, and they can vote on budgets. And our map, what I've presented to you, it provides this quick and understandable international comparison of where each country is situated in terms of its neighbors also, in Europe and overall. And if you want, the research helps us to maybe name and shame countries by doing or not doing their job in terms of providing their citizens with good, high quality healthcare. And it helps to create this healthy competition between member states for a better position in the ranking. And most importantly, of course, what is our main goal is to generate political change. So for instance, with our members, we present this research in the parliaments. We also collaborate with academia. But of course, what is very important that, in my country, we say, a warrior alone in the field will not win. So we need to also have civil society on board, have the government, of course, on board. So to convince people, to find people with common interests to fight this fight together. So it's very important. So then recommendations, some of our recommendations is to include free and gender-neutral HPV vaccination into routine state vaccination schedules, provide free mature population-based screening programs, and we consider states are responsible for providing citizens with reliable evidence-based information. And yes, I think I'll come to an end. I want to thank expert group MSD who supported this research, and also national experts and partners who helped us gather this information. Thank you for your attention.
Presentation, you demonstrated really well on the data, the massive differences between different countries across Europe, whether it's in availability of having a policy implemented to fight HPV cancers, or in terms of lack of availability of funding, so that in Slovakia is vaccine hesitancy, as well as basically low awareness of even existence of the HPV vaccination. What do you think? What would you recommend in order to improve this situation where lack of awareness is basically causing this very, very small uptake of the vaccine?
Yes, so first of all, in terms of our stakeholders are members of parliament with whom we work. And of course, when we try to enter into the country, first of all, we reach out to parliamentarians. We try to convince them first, because we need to have a decision maker who is convinced, and then he will start making changes. So we reach out, we engage, we convince, and after that we can jointly conduct a public hearing, bring in role models from other countries where this has worked. We have success stories from Australia, from Denmark, so we can bring in members of parliament from those countries to show how they face these challenges. And of course, what is also very important, once you have parliamentarians who are convinced and want to work, that they should bring in and link up with the government and with civil society and jointly work with that. And in terms of vaccine hesitancy, it's a very big issue. Thank you for this question. We can maybe draw lessons from countries where this has happened some time ago. There was, for example, cases in Denmark and in Ireland. They suffered from massive anti-HPV vaccination campaigns, and vaccine rates started to drop. So the governments, jointly with WHO, they created several steps of how to fight this. First of all, there are 3 rules that were elaborated, which I think are quite useful. So first of all, we need to remember that our target audience is the general public, not the vaccine deniers. So we need to work with the general public and educate them. Parliamentarians can also take an important role in that. Then we always need to unmask, to reveal the techniques and the myths and the lies that vocal vaccine denier is using, and to correct this context and to provide the real information. And finally, there are always in the society undecided people, so they are not in favor and not pro, so we need to focus also on them and to make them more resilient to anti-vaccine statements and stories, and to support them in their decision to accept to be vaccinated. So I think these 3 steps could be useful in other contexts.
Thank you very much for this comprehensive advice, certainly very useful. And now I turn to Professor Miloš Jeseňák, who can give us a bit of a immunological and pediatric point of view in terms of this discussion. Over to you, Professor Jeseňák.
So once again, good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for the invitation. As you know, my name is Miloš Jeseňák. I'm a pediatrician and clinical immunologist, allergologist. I'm taking care about a lot of patients of immune-mediated diseases. I'm just dealing with the problematics of vaccination in specific situation. And I just want to have some few notes to HPV infectious and its consequences. Can I ask to see my presentation, whether it's possible? Okay, so I will just have a few notes and comments to certain selected immunological and pediatric features which are connected with HPV and its consequences. Currently, we know that we are facing a global burden of various lifestyle diseases, and we see that cancer is one of the most important. And only few of these can be preventable by effective tools. And unfortunately, vaccine is the only possibility how can we prevent certain types of the cancer. And in this case, we should speak especially about the HPV vaccination, because all the other lifestyle diseases cannot be effectively prevented by some single measure compared, for example, to HPV-associated cancer. So in this case, we know it's typical for this century in medicine. We switched and moved during the last few decades from the treatment and curative medicine to the preventive medicine. It's not only in immunology, allergology, cardiology, but especially it's in oncology, because we know that there is a significant burden of various types of the cancer. So I just will focus on HPV, its immune consequences, long-term, short-term consequences, and then I will have some comments to the situation in Slovakia and some challenges we should face very soonly if you'd like to change something. I think one of the most tricky and very risky thing which is connected with HPV is that this is the most prevalent sexual transmitted diseases. And this is a little bit stigma, because a lot of our colleagues, but also a lot of parents or the patients are just thinking that this is only connected with certain type of the lifestyle, like promiscuity and so on. But on the other hand, we know that the prevalence of HPV-associated infections from short-term and long-term point of view is absolutely, it's reaching approximately 80% of whole general adult population. Today, we know that HPV is affecting both genders, therefore it's absolutely crucial to maintain gender-neutral vaccination strategy. Unfortunately, like 20 years ago, the HPV vaccination was introduced as a vaccination against the cervical cancer. And therefore, this is quite stigma, which is ongoing. And a lot of people are just thinking this is the only disease in which we can see helpful approach of the HPV vaccination. But on the other hand, currently we know that there is a broad spectrum of genital and extragenital malign and benign diseases affecting both genders, affecting all age categories. And currently we we can see and we see very exactly the participation of HPV, especially risky genotypes, on the mechanisms of oncogenesis. And taking into account that this is the only oncogenic virus with available preventive vaccination, we should be more quick or more rapid in improving the situation, especially in the country with very, very low vaccination rate. In a little bit broader view, also the vaccination against the hepatitis B is in some sense the vaccination against the cancer. But in HPV vaccination, there is a clear preventive connection with the decreased incidence and prevalence of a lot of cancers. Moreover, very typical is that infectious is very soon after a sexual debut. This is quite interesting and tricky that when there was comparison between, for example, USA parents and European parents, the first thing why they don't think about the vaccination of their adolescent was that they think that their adolescents are not behaving sexually and just waiting for the marriage. But unfortunately, or in reality, this is not true. So therefore, we see that very soon after the start of sexual life of young man, young woman, it comes to the contact with HPV. Fortunately, the majority of infections are self-limiting. So therefore, we can see spontaneous clearance within several weeks to month. But on the other hand, under certain combination of risky genotype, immunocompromisation, chronic disease, and so on, it can come to the chronic persisting infections with the development of short-term and long-term consequences of HPV. From the point of view of immunology, it's very important that the virus possesses a lot of mechanisms how to escape from immune surveillance. And despite that each of us can underwent a lot of HPV infections during their life, each of these infections doesn't lead to any protective systemic immunity, and therefore we can see frequent reinfections. So therefore, the situation in Slovakia, it's quite dramatic. I'm just working in the field of HPV vaccination more than 15 years. And currently, of the target age cohort, which is 13 years old, I will speak a little bit later on about this. We have approximately 15% of vaccination rate, with a little bit higher rate in girls, lower in boys. But this is in 13 years target, we can see the full coverage by health insurance company for the bivalent vaccine. If the parents decided to get the 9-valent vaccine, they should co-pay the differences. So we are just moving on, and we are just working on the full coverage also of 9-valent vaccine. Other things which are connected with quite low vaccination rate is the lack of knowledge, not only of but also scientific societies. I think we should work on the available and objective information channels on the internet, on the TV, and so on. There is also some misunderstanding of true impact of severity of HPV infections with some irrelevant doubts about the safety of HPV vaccine. At the end of this presentation, I have a few comments to safety issues connected with HPV vaccines. And of course, outside the 13 years old cohort, there is only partial or non-coverage by health insurance company. Therefore, this should be changed if you would like to move on with the numbers of vaccinated patients. This is like typical immunological slide, but anyway, we know from the research that there are a lot of mechanisms how the HPV virus can just lie to the immune system and can escape from the immune surveillance, like by decrease of interferon production with inhibition of tumor suppressor genes. Very interesting is, for example, that the HPV can even mask that the cells are infected, so therefore they are not recognized by, for example, CD8 T lymphocytes, that they are not destroyed. But this round is usually from the chronic persistent infections to the carcinoma development is approximately 10 to 15 years. In HPV-associated disease, currently we know there is a broad spectrum affecting both genders, males and females. The top one is cervical cancer, which is 100% connected with HPV infections, but approximately 20 to 30% of anal cancer, oropharyngeal cancer, and so also some other forms of the tumors are also connected with HPV, and therefore it's quite interesting to see the numbers. This is, I think, the numbers from USA from the last year. And as we see, there is very interesting and very significant burden, not only of cervical cancer, but also of other cancers in the other localization. The genital warts, which are in certain way the benign consequences of HPV infections, which can be seen very soon after the infections, are also quite important because the number of affected individuals is quite high, and also this type of the HPV-related benign disease is quite tricky for disease. Regarding the connection between the type of the cancer and the risky HPV genotype, we see that 1618 is across nearly all the cancer type. But on the other hand, in cervical cancer, we have some other important genotypes which should be also prevented by vaccination. So therefore, I think it's really time to start thinking about the broad prevention of HPV by 9-valent vaccine, not only by dual vaccine. Moreover, 6 and 11 genotype, which are considered to be associated, especially with genital warts, can also participate in the current cancer development. And what is absolutely crucial in move on in this area is that we have 100% preventable oncology disease by vaccination, which is the cervical cancer. Also, the publication from the last year from us and in the other journals, it really confirmed true real-world efficacy data, which are very important and very impressive. But we should also comment that also other HPV-associated diseases, although the importance of HPV is a little bit lower, but it's not negligible. And the reality in Slovakia, currently each year we are just losing approximately 300 women, sisters, mothers, wives, grandmothers from the families which are dying from the cancer, which is fully preventable by the vaccination. One comment to the vaccination in prepubertal period, because in this case we can use 2 dose series, because there is a quite high chance of HPV naivety. Moreover, we know that in this age the immune system is fully robust and fully effective, and also we are absolutely sufficient to have only 2 doses which are able to induce the comparable seroconversion compared to the 3-dose series in all the subjects. And the aims of the vaccination against HPV, of course, they are short-term, mid-term, and long-term. And currently, not only from the clinical trials, but also from the real-world data, we see that there is a full evidence-based that we are able to fulfill all these aims which are connected with HPV vaccination. And a few comments to safety profile, because currently we know that from the trials, from the real-world data, the safety profile is very beneficial from short-term and long-term point of view. Some serious side effects are documented only by some sporadic case reports or case report series, but we should honestly say that true causal association was not confirmed in the majority of these events, because not everything which is observed after the vaccination, in post-vaccination period, can be also attributed to the vaccination. And very important is that highly discussed connection between HPV vaccination and autoimmunity induction in the past was ruled out by big studies in different age category, different population with different genetic background. So I will finish with this slide, because there are a lot of hoaxes and the myth which are just circulating around the HPV vaccination, because I remember also when I started to work in the field of vaccination that a lot of parents were just thinking that HPV vaccination is the ticket to promiscuous life and so on. But currently, we have a lot of data that this vaccination does not increase any risky sexual behavior, does not increase the number of sexual partners. Moreover, the subjects which are vaccinated against HPV has higher responsibility in sexual life and also increased adherence to screening of the cervical cancer. And honestly, we should say that currently we have quite improving situation in screening of cervical cancer. Therefore, I think that we should update a little bit data from the first presentation, because currently there is a national program for screening of the cervical cancer. Other forms of the cancer which can be connected with HPV, unfortunately, do not have any strategy regarding the screening program, but we are also moving on in this. And of course, what is important is the vaccination against HPV, increasing the quality of life. And I will just finish with one sentence, one comment, that I think every life which is lost in case of the disease which is preventable by vaccination is really pity for the healthcare system in particular countries, because we can save a lot of life also by vaccination against HPV. So thank you for attention, and once again, thank you for invitation and for getting me in this round and table.
Thank you very much, Professor Jeseňák. This was super interesting. You mentioned a number of stigmas and hoaxes about the HPV vaccine. I mean, here in GLOBSEC, we cover hoaxes and disinformation quite intensely, also related to vaccination. So I'm interested whether these kinds of stereotypes or half-truths or sometimes complete hoaxes are also prevalent sometimes among your colleagues, if this is the case or not. And if so, what would be your advice to address this situation?
Unfortunately, it's quite frequent also among the colleagues. But taking into consideration the average age of pediatrician, general pediatrician, which is approximately 60 years, unfortunately, we should wait a little bit for generation change. Okay. So I don't think that we will be able to persuade our colleagues at the age of 70 years that this is really important type of the vaccination. So we should just continuously move on to educate, especially younger colleagues. And I should say that many of our colleagues, especially those which are just working in the primary care, are quite increasing the rate of the vaccination, not only against the HPV, but also some other vaccine-preventable diseases. But some reasons for this is the quite high age of our colleagues. And on the other hand, also since Slovakia is considered to be a very religious country, although some of the behavior of these people are not corresponding to this, but I don't want to comment it. But this is also some another thing that people are just considering the HPV only as sexual transmitted disease. But we know, for example, that up to 15% of children before the reaching age of sexual life can be infected by other ways, not only by sexual contact. So this should be also stressed and regularly explained to our colleagues. Just don't think only about this, that this is related to the females, to the promiscuity and to the sexual life. There are a lot of other important issues connected with HPV.
Thank you very much, Professor. So this leads me to basically assuming that public awareness is one of the keys that we really need to work on. And this is perhaps a topic for Dr. Baker, because basically in the UK, they have this gender-neutral vaccination campaign. So we are very curious to hear about the success of this campaign. Over to you, Dr. Baker.
Thank you very much indeed. Just let me share my screen. I hope you can all see that.
Yes.
Yeah, you can see that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much indeed for inviting me to talk to you. What I'd like to discuss is the ability of civil society organisations to work together to successfully influence policy, both at the national and the international level. And I've been very lucky to have been involved in two organisations which have attempted to do this, one in the UK, HPV Action, and more recently with the European Cancer Organisation, which has established an HPV Action network, which is also trying to, or has in fact been raising these issues at the European level. So what I'll do is talk a little bit about the work in the UK, and then I'll say something about the work in Europe. So starting with the UK, along with many other countries, the UK began a vaccination programme for girls in around 2008. And the UK has in fact been one of the most successful countries in terms of achieving a high level of uptake. And we've consistently, until COVID came along, seen vaccination rates of over 80% in girls. Of course, that does mask considerable variations between different demographic groups and different parts of the country. So there are some wide variations. In Scotland, for example, they achieve a 90% vaccination rate, and in some parts of London, vaccination rates are as low as 60%. So there are wide variations, but overall the vaccination rate for girls has been consistently quite high in the UK. In 2013, the UK government's Vaccination Advisory Committee, which is called the JCVI, the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, decided to take a look at whether boys should also be vaccinated, whether they should be added to the national programme. It was pretty clear that right from the start, although the JCVI decided it would look at this issue, it had pretty much made up its mind that it wasn't a good idea. It wasn't cost effective because so many girls were vaccinated. And the argument was that if you achieve a very high vaccination rate, that effectively protects the boys, because the boys can't be infected by girls who have been previously vaccinated. A number of us who are working in this field, I came from a background in men's health, and I was concerned about the lack of vaccination for boys. A number of us came together and we decided that we would look at this for ourselves. And we very quickly concluded that the vaccination program for girls, although pretty effective for girls, wasn't really sufficient when it came to vaccinating boys. Clearly, there are a number of cancers, as we've already heard, that affect boys as well as girls, and penile cancer clearly only affects boys or men. We also know that men who have sex with men can't be effectively protected by a girls-only vaccination program. So it's pretty clear that if we want to protect the whole population against HPV-caused cancers, then we need a gender-neutral vaccination program. And we set up an independent network, a coalition of organisations, both professional, patient, and other organisations from a wide range of backgrounds, to come together to campaign on the issue of gender-neutral vaccination. And we established HPV Action in 2013. And quite quickly, we assembled a large number of groups. And by, I think it was about 2017, we had 50 signed up to the campaign. And our single goal was achieving gender-neutral HPV vaccination. We campaigned on several fronts. We were obviously very keen to demonstrate the public health and clinical benefits of vaccinating both boys and girls. It was quite clear that around 2,000 cancers a year in men were caused by HPV cancers, and they, of course, could be prevented, or they were more likely to be prevented by a gender-neutral vaccination program. We also wanted to demonstrate the economic benefits of vaccinating both boys and girls. This cost-effective issue was a very critical one, as I've said. It was really the basis on which the JCVI was making its decisions. And it was quite clear once we looked in detail at the cost-effectiveness modelling that it was based on a number of assumptions that quite frankly didn't stand up. So there were issues around the length of time over which you assess cost effectiveness, for example. Another issue was the assumptions that were made about what percentage of each cancer was caused by HPV. And for example, we detected that the number of oropharyngeal cancers that the committee was looking at was very low. It wasn't really supported by the evidence. And also the modelling was based on a very narrow range of assumptions, basically on the cost of treatment of HPV cancers, and it didn't take account of the wider economic and social costs, both to individuals, families, employers, and wider social care costs to the government. And we also did a lot of work to build up political consensus around the need for a change to policy. And we lobbied Parliament from all political parties about this, and we were quite successful actually in getting support from politicians from all parties, and it was very important that we had support from MPs, members of Parliament from the governing party, the Conservative Party, and in fact a number of Conservative MPs led the call in Parliament for a change in policy. Getting the support of the media was extremely important, and we were very lucky to be able to generate a large number of stories in the press. And one very widely read newspaper actually came out in support of the campaign and published a number of articles. And this was a newspaper that was very supportive generally of the Conservative Party, so it was one that the government was particularly keen to listen to. And running through everything we did were arguments of equality and equity. Basically, we made the point that it simply wasn't fair not to vaccinate boys because we could protect a large number of boys and men against cancers, and we weren't doing so. And of course, there was the particular issue, as I said, of men who have sex with men who are completely unprotected by a girls-only vaccination policy. There was a fairly early change in policy by the Vaccination Advisory Committee, the JCVI. They did recommend this actually was implemented in 2018, a policy of vaccinating men who have sex with men. They were offered vaccinations through sexual health clinics. Basically, the idea was that if a man turned up at a sexual health clinic, identified himself as someone who had sex with other men, then he would be offered the HPV vaccine. Now, we argued that while that was helpful to a small number of men, it didn't really help the male population as a whole, and it wasn't even particularly effective for men who have sex with men, because the average age at which they attended for the first time a sexual health clinic was 31 years. By that time, there was a good chance they'd already been infected and the damage was already done. So a policy which just aimed at vaccinating men who have sex with men really wasn't satisfactory. And we continued to push the campaign for gender-neutral HPV vaccination for all 12 to 13-year-olds. And that began, in fact, we were successful. We managed to persuade the committee to change its policy, and boys began to be vaccinated in 2019. In fact, it was the arguments of equality and equity that won the day in the end. And I think one of the things that really helped, that really tipped the balance at the end of the day, was the threat of legal action against the government on the grounds of sex discrimination. We got one of our member organisations got legal advice that not vaccinating boys was a fairly clear case of sex discrimination, and the government would actually be breaching its own equality laws if it didn't decide to vaccinate boys. And I think rather than actually risk losing in court, the government decided quite quickly that it should actually make the decision to vaccinate boys as well as girls. Having achieved our objective, and boys and girls are now vaccinated in the UK, we were able to wind up HPV action, and we closed in 2020. But the campaign didn't end there because many of the ideas and that many of the activities that we developed in the UK were adopted by the European Cancer Organization, which established its own HPV action network in 2019. This network now has about 45 members and stakeholders. Gender-neutral HPV vaccination is one of the core aims, but also it goes wider than that. The network is making the case for cancer screening programs, including self-sampling, equal access to the best quality treatments for HPV-caused cancers, and also greater public and professional awareness, not least to counter the misinformation and fake news that swirls around the whole HPV vaccination issue. We're working across the whole of the European region. Some of the focus in the initial period has been on the EU around the Beating Cancer Plan and trying to influence that, but our aspirations for change go well beyond the EU and cover the whole European region. As I said, we have been advocating on the Beating Cancer Plan, and I'm pleased to say our work with that of others has been successful in changing EU policy. And as you've already heard, there is now a very clear commitment to gender-neutral HPV vaccination throughout the EU. And our next steps are to do what we can to support member states to implement that goal. And one thing that I think may be of particular interest to this meeting is that from next year, we're planning to do what we can to support advocacy networks on HPV in countries that are currently falling behind. We're doing some mapping work, which complements the work that Marina has already talked about. We're doing some mapping work to identify what's actually going on with vaccination screening across the European region. We're going to use the insight we get from that to identify which countries are falling behind. We'll look at where there's real potential for making progress, where there's interest from organizations in those countries in collaborating around advocacy, and we'll do what we can to support that work. How we'll actually do that is yet to be determined, but we're keen to work with partners in different countries to support initiatives around vaccination and screening. So I think there's a huge opportunity through civil society organisations working together to achieve change. We've seen what can be done both in the UK and at the European-wide level, and I'm confident that we can take the learning from that and make a difference across the whole of the European region. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much indeed.
Mr. Baker, for this also encouraging message, knowing that the European Cancer Organization is actually looking for partners to basically improve the situation in the worst performing countries. Also, European Cancer Organization proposed basically establishing a so-called HPV vaccine tracker. So I was wondering, Dr. Baker, whether you could tell us what this kind of tracker could achieve. Why should it be helpful?
Yeah, we think a vaccine tracker, which really which pulls together information about what's going on throughout Europe, will be extremely helpful. We've seen the value of this, I think, in relation to COVID-19 vaccination, where ECDC has established a vaccine tracker, and it really enables countries to measure their performance against their neighbours in other countries in the region. And I think it will provide real encouragement and motivation. Not only it will highlight best practice where things are going well, but also where things are going badly, but it will help to put pressure on those countries that maybe aren't doing so well to improve their performance. So I think that could be extremely valuable as not only for countries to learn about how they can improve their performance, but also to push them to do so.
Sounds very good. And another success story that perhaps we should hear now is the one which Dr. Zoltán Novák could tell us about, because we know that Hungary is doing quite well in terms of HPV vaccine rates. I hope that the Dr. Novák can now hear us, so hopefully, fingers crossed.
Yes, hello, I can hear you, and I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Great, perfect. Okay, so thank you for this opportunity and the invitation. I have to be honest, maybe I'm not the one who has to tell you this success story, because I'm just a physician. I'm a surgeon, gynecological oncologist, and I'm doing daily, surgical interventions and patient care. I'm just coming out of the theater right now, and I was not really the one involved in the HPV vaccination campaign. I received this demand a few days ago from the state secretary, and I didn't say no. So I tried my best. I tried to collect some data and some details about the HPV vaccination campaign, but I don't have first-hand experience. I'm a gynecologist. I helped with the expert advices, the development of cervical cancer prevention programs, but the HPV vaccination program was not coordinated by me, and I wasn't part of this. And so after this disclosure, I'm trying to give you a very short review about what I found, and I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, okay. So I'm a head of department of gynecology in the National Institute of Oncology in Hungary, and I'm doing like really patient care, and I'm 100% physician. So the vaccination program in Hungary is traditionally, and sorry for the Hungarian some kind of text, I'm going to translate if something is important. So I have to tell you that the Hungarian vaccination program was always in the last century was well established. It's a pro-vaccination country, we can say that. We had always have high acceptance of vaccination in every preventable disease. So we have a long history of vaccination programs starting in the second part of the 19th century. And after at the beginning of the 20th century, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, and so on, all these vaccination campaigns were usually included in the school vaccination programs. And now at 2014, the HPV vaccination for girls, and in 2020, the HPV vaccination for boys became available and state funded in our country. So here I just photographed a vaccination card, a calendar which school doctors, school physicians use. If you can see that at 11 years, there is an MMR revaccination. At 12 years old, there is a hepatitis B vaccination if needed. And at 12 years old, the HPV vaccination is offered to the children and to their parents. So let's see that how is it right now in Hungary. So the HPV vaccination program started in 2014 for young girls. It is optional, and it's 100% funded by the state. So there is no need for patient payment for the vaccination. And of course, it's a parental decision. So parental decision needed to administer this vaccine. And it started in 2014 for girls, for 12-year-old girls who were in the 7th grade of the primary school. This is a vaccination which takes place in the school. And usually this is administered by school pediatricians. I don't know in other countries if it is the same or not, but here in our country, we have pediatricians in every primary school who are responsible for the vaccinations of every children, educated in that primary school. And usually these school pediatricians are educated and trained regularly concerning novelties and scientific discoveries and new evidences on the subject of vaccinations, including HPV vaccination also. From the school year of 2018 and 19, the 9-component vaccine was used, and it also at the same time the vaccination rate increased even further. I'm going to show it to you very soon. And at 2020, the start of the vaccination of 12-year-old boys took place, and it is the same. So 12-year-old boys in the 7th grade of primary school are vaccinated from the last year. And now I show you the vaccine coverage rates. This is the coverage rates when both doses were administered. So this is complete vaccine coverage rate for 12-year-old children in 7th grade of primary school. And you can see that it was, from the beginning, it was quite high. So it was around 77% for the girls. The blue line is the girls' data. And from the last year, you can see this green line here. The boy vaccination started, and it was quite hopeful at the beginning, because if you see that even at the first year of this vaccination campaign, it passed 70, so it was almost 71% coverage rate for the boys also. Right now, last year, we have data from the last year, of course. The coverage rates for girls was around 82-83%. If you compare this coverage rate to other countries, you can see that Hungary is quite well situated. You can see that Hungary is here at, I don't know, it's maybe eighth position, ninth position, and including the first dose administered and including the final dose administered also. So it is quite a success story, and our performance is much better than that of our neighbors in the Eastern and Central European region. So what can be the reasons for this vaccination success? This is, we have to say that this is in general a pro-vaccination population. Traditionally and historically, we had a very well-organized vaccination system. It is somehow our heritage from the ex-communist era also, and it was this very same situation with the HPV vaccination. Even our COVID vaccination rates are very good. So this is generally a pro-vaccine population, and there is not so much anti-vaccine movements here in Hungary. The vaccination was included in school vaccinations program. I think that this is a quite important step because parents and children are used to school vaccination programs, and if there is an extra vaccine added to the school vaccination program, the acceptance is quite simple, and the system already works. School physicians regularly check up and screen these patients, these children. They have a good relationship with this pediatrician. The families and the children, they trust these pediatricians. So if they offer a new vaccine, usually the acceptance is quite good. At the same time, there was a quite intensive PR campaign, which aimed both the parents and the children. I'm going to show you some leaflets and a short video as well. So, as I understood here in Hungary, they thought that it would be the best if they aim both the parents and both the children, because then a discussion can be made at home about the benefits and risk of this vaccine. And these are 12-year-old children, so they are, let's say that they are already half grown up, half adults. So they need to be actively involved in this decision-making process, and they need to be informed in order to actively take part in this discussion concerning their future and their future health. And of course, those primary health care providers who administer the vaccine and who informed directly the parents and the children, they received an intensive education. Me, for example, I took part in these education campaigns. So we organized regularly education meetings, and online and personal face-to-face meetings with school physicians, with GPs, with pediatricians, and we try to train them and to educate them and to give them all the resources and the evidences and scientific background necessary to be able to convince and to make the best suggestions possible for their patients. The pro-vaccination campaigns were active, so there was always a quite active pro-vaccination campaign in every online media, in every media, in TV, in radio, and in online media channels also. And I'm going to show you an example, these campaigns were aiming those media surfaces also, which are used frequently by this young generation. I'm speaking, for example, TikTok. I'm going to show you a video. So they try to use those channels which are used really frequently by this young generation. And I have to tell you, I didn't know anything about these channels as long as I started to prepare this presentation, because I know, unfortunately, this is another generation. And the cooperation of authorities, patient organization, societies, and physician societies, and of course industry, was quite successful here in our country. And let me just make a small, comment about the role of patient organization bodies and societies, because I think this is not really. So I think this is a very important part of the whole process. Patient organizations are founded by patients who survived, who were diagnosed with cervical cancer, and who survived the cervical cancer. So these are those people, these are those women who are really highly credible sources of information concerning this disease, really. And they have a very good patient-friendly communication. So they know the way how to communicate with non-healthcare specialists. We physicians, I have to tell you, maybe we don't communicate always the best way with patients and with those people who didn't get special education and special trainings in healthcare. Maybe we use medical terms too much, and we cannot find the best way to communicate with non-specialist people, and these patient organizations really found a way how to communicate with them very easily. And these are highly motivated people. They usually work pro bono, so they don't work for salaries. They are survivors, and this is the motivation of their life. They, in our country, for example, I think much of the innovation for the communication campaigns came from the patient organization societies, because they were really motivated people working day and night for the prevention of this disease, which destroyed their life. And it was a very successful cooperation with these patient organizations, with medical specialists like our from Gynecological Oncology Society, for example, and the industry. And just let me show you a few examples. I'm just sorry how to do it. New share, yes. For example, this is a TikTok video. So I don't know if you know TikTok. This is an online media channel which is really very frequently used by this teenager generation, and they make small they make very short videos. Usually these are musical videos, and these are like, I don't know, there's a really short ones, so approximately between half and 1 minute length, and this generation really loves this kind of media channel. So these are TikTok stars in Hungary. These were the 3 biggest TikTok stars who had the biggest influence on their generation. And that's a short video they made about the importance and prevention of the HPV virus. So this, at the end, this text says that be part of the decision. Talk with your parents about the necessity of HPV vaccination. And after, of course, internet accesses and online links are given. So these campaigns really aimed the channels which are used by this generation, and they encouraged discussion with the parents about this very important decision. Maybe I'm going to just show you another one. I don't know if, just a moment. And yes, these are and a lot of pamphlets and written information leaflets were created about the importance of HPV vaccination. I'll show you an example. I don't know if you can see that right now. Yes.
Yeah.
So these campaigns and information leaflets were really highly available in every school, and became available for every parent who needed to make the decision about the HPV vaccination. Online information, online web pages were created about the importance of HPV virus, and this massive amount of information was ready and was easy to find on the online sources. And so I think that's all I could share about the success story in Hungary, and I'm really open to your questions. I hope that I can answer it. As I told you, maybe there are questions I cannot really answer. Okay,
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Novák. I think you covered it actually quite in depth, given that you said you are not really participating in the HPV vaccination program, although you mentioned you have participated in the awareness raising campaigns, also interesting campaigns that you showed us. I'm just wondering, I mean, for me, it's very interesting to hear example from another post-communist country where you see this kind of pro-vaccination system surviving. And to me, it's quite interesting that it's not so much the case in each post-communist country, because as we have seen in Slovakia, the vaccination rates are actually much worse. But I wanted to also ask you whether COVID-19 and the whole anti-vax movement around COVID-19 vaccinations, did it affect vaccination rates, HPV vaccination rates in Hungary in any way at all?
Yes, and thank you for this question. I'm so happy because I can now I can really answer to that. So, and then okay. So I asked this, and I looked it up, and there is no change. So the COVID didn't reduce the vaccination rates in Hungary, and we are happy for that. So hopefully it's going to even increase a little bit.
That's very good news. Thank you very much, Dr. Novák. So now we can move on to another success story, which is Sweden, and I invite Professor Joachim Dillner to tell us about what's going on in Sweden and why is Sweden doing so well. I think you need to unmute yourself, Professor Dillner.
Thank you very much. I will see if I can share my screen, just a minute. So, okay. So my name is Joachim Dillner, and I am will be telling you about our strategies that we have in Sweden. We have an ambitious national goal to eliminate cervical cancer by 2026. And I will tell you about the strategies that we are doing now. I'm a scientific director at the Medical Diagnostics Division of Karolinska, and I'm also heading the Central Human Papillomavirus Screening Laboratory of the organized program, where we also have a national cervical screening registry. I will start with the setting of where we are now. And I thought I could say a little bit also on how we arrived at this setting where we are at right now. We have a school-based vaccination of girls was implemented in 2012, and it's 83 to 88% population coverage, small variations between different years. We started vaccinating the boys in 2019, and the population coverage is about the same. I could say that when we implemented the school-based vaccination of girls, there was a large amount of experimentation on how to do this in the most effective manner, or that was also saving resources. And actually, it turns out that we had a large number of different campaigns in PR, etc., that was tried experimentally, but where we couldn't measure an effect. However, what had a very strong effect was giving the vaccines at school. All the vaccines are given at school by the school nurse. There is always a school nurse that's always there to take care of the health of the children, and she is giving the vaccines in the school. That is, of course, mandatory for all children to attend. And all experiments where we try to give it somewhere else than in the school where it is convenient for the children had an immediate dropping effect of poor coverage. But as it is organized by the school nurse. The information is given by individual letters that contains all the information that's needed for the girls and the parents. And this appears to be sufficient. The cervical screening is ages 23 to 70. And it has an 83% population coverage, which I think is among the best in the world. The coverage is particularly high among the youngest girls, where 92% of the girls in the population participate. Here, I can say that we had a huge help from the patient organizations when it came to having the old cervical screening program using cytology stopped and going over to human papillomavirus-based screening. There was simply a considerable resistance from the medical profession that was used to doing it in the old way. And it was a number of evaluation of cost effectiveness, etc., had no effect on changing the policy, but the patient organizations who really demanded the best possible screening really managed to change it to HPV-based screening. I can say also that when it comes to the population coverage, we don't do this very complicated. It's simply that there is an appointment letter sent to everyone with an appointment, and if the woman doesn't show up, she gets a new appointment each year until she finally shows up. So it's just repeated appointments, and we really don't have very much else of hullabaloo about it. I could say a few words regarding why the vaccination of boys was started 7 years after the vaccination of girls, because actually we had absolutely no one who was against vaccination of boys in Sweden. We had profession, health economists, patients, etc. Everyone was in favor of it, but it still dragged on for a number of years until it was finally started. And actually, the only argument against it was that there was sort of bewilderment why Britain wasn't doing it. And when Britain started, also Sweden started. Now I can say that, so I could say thank you to Dr. Baker for having made this change. It was interesting to know how it had happened. Now we had a parliamentary decision early in 2021 in response to the WHO call on cervical cancer elimination. And it says that cervical cancer should be eliminated in Sweden within 5 to 7 years, which would be by 2026. Now, I showed this figure here, which is a result of our infectious disease transmission modeling, where we are looking at the demands for eradication of HPV in terms of coverage of vaccination. And I would like you to focus on the dark blue curve here. And the one here is 100% reduction. So that would mean that the infection is completely eliminated from the population. HPV 16 is the dark blue one here. which is the most dangerous HPV type, which is also the one that is most difficult to eradicate. And you can see to the left here is girls-only vaccination. And you can see that eradication is anticipated at 90% coverage of the girls, which is not easy to obtain. Even well-organized countries are not really reaching 90%, almost, but not quite. However, to the right is the predicted effect if you have a gender-neutral vaccination. And here you can see that at just 70% coverage of both sexes, even HPV-16 is predicted to be eliminated. And at least to us, 70% doesn't seem very difficult. We are already up above 80%. So I think we are definitely on the pathway to elimination of HPV with gender-neutral vaccination with a high coverage. I could also point out that actually the other oncogenic viruses like 18 and 31 and those are much easier to eliminate than HPV-16. It's interesting to know this. This was a follow-up of the vaccination when it was both given to girls at schools and available to the women to take it at their own initiative. This was at a time when we had a lot of women who had not yet been vaccinated, and we followed them all in the national screening registry. And the orange curve here is the risk for cervical cancer if you have not been vaccinated. If you've been vaccinated before age of 17, it was almost no risk at all, 88% risk reduction. And the blue line here are the women who were vaccinated in the ages between 17 to 30. It was a 53% risk reduction. So you can see that it's very effective if you give it before sexual debut. And in this group here, 17 to 30 years of age, we were of course wondering what this is due to. And it's actually completely explained by having had an HPV infection at the time of vaccination, because it is a preventive vaccine, but it doesn't cure an already existing infection. And it seems like we had a lost opportunity here because women were not tested for HPV when they were vaccinated. One can say that had we done that and followed up the women who were HPV-16 positive at vaccination, also they shouldn't have developed cervical cancer. So this is a little bit of a lost opportunity. So now what we are focusing on in order to achieve the elimination as fast as possible, we have the basic elements of an elimination program are already in place. High coverage, gender-neutral vaccination at schools, and a well-organized, high participation HPV-based cervical screening program is also in place. So what we are doing now is called faster HPV elimination. We were a group of European experts who formulated this in 2015. Faster is not an acronym. It actually means that we want the elimination of cervical cancer to be faster. But if you think here of a group of women who start to be screened, ages from 23 to 25, and you vaccinate and HPV test all of them, most of them will have been HPV negative at the vaccination. They are basically protected from cervical cancer in the future, and a minority will have been HPV positive at vaccination. Those we can follow up as we usually do in the cervical screening program. So those, they don't need to develop cervical cancer either. So by doing this, we can eliminate cervical cancer also from women in the screening ages. This is a curve on the incidence of HPV-16 in Sweden before we started vaccination. The infection was very much common among young girls. The peak incidence was in ages 17 to 18, but it declined rather rapidly. And above age 35, we had only occasional incident infections. And when we translate that to reproductive rates, as you know from the work on how to combat COVID, you need to get reproductive number down below 1 in order for an infection to start to disappear. And it turns out that if people up to age 35 are immune, the reproductive rate is 0.4. So that would mean a very rapid extinction in the older age groups, unless it hadn't been for the fact that we are sometimes fed the infections from the younger people. In the box here are the girls who have already been vaccinated at school. They are now 22 years old. We started in 2012, and which means that in Sweden it's basically girls between 23 and about 30 that are still transmitting the infection. And it is in this age group that it is most cost effective to stop HPV as soon as possible. And that is what we're trying to do with the so-called faster one-time HPV vaccination and screening campaign. So to summarize a little bit, the setting when we start for elimination of cervical cancer is that we have the basic things in place: school-based HPV vaccination of both genders with very high coverage. And we also have an organized screening program based on HPV screening that also has a very high coverage. And therefore, our current focus is on a one-time campaign with HPV vaccination and HPV screening of adolescent women, a so-called faster campaign, which was started in May this year and is ongoing right now. A permanent elimination of HPV from Sweden by 2026 is the goal, and it appears that we are still on track to achieve this goal. Thank you very much.
Professor Zilner, it certainly goes to show that gender-neutral vaccination programs at schools are the way to go. I couldn't help but notice that Sweden has even more ambitious date for elimination of HPV-caused cancers by 2026, more ambitious than even World Health Organization or the European Union. Given all that you have just presented to us, do you think that this very ambitious date is likely to be met?
Yes, this is definitely true. The Parliament had looked at what Australia and other organizations had said in terms of an elimination date. And they said that we would like to beat this. So therefore we put 2026. And yeah, it will be a lot of work, but I think we are on track to do this.
That's fantastic. Well, fingers crossed for Sweden. Now I think it's time to move on again to a bigger perspective, to a more European perspective. So, Ms. Sibilia Quilici, we would like to hear your perspective on the incidence of HPV cancers in Europe, vaccination coverage, and recommendations. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. So let me share screen. Can you confirm it works?
It works, yeah.
Okay. So thank you so much for the opportunity. I tried to adapt my speech based on everything that has been said, because obviously a lot might be redundant. So maybe just to start with, I think what I wanted to show today in connection with what has been said is, well, first to reconfirm indeed that vaccines can prevent cancers. This is not a given. This is not what people actually have in mind when they think about vaccines. When people think about vaccines, it's about pediatrics, it's about childhood, it's about infectious diseases like measles, influenza, varicella potentially, but it's hardly about preventing cancers. And in fact, there are actually two types of vaccines that prevent cancers. Today, we talked a lot about HPV, but it's also about hepatitis B infection that can actually lead to chronic hepatitis B and liver dysfunction and cancers. So we have actually vaccines that that prevent cancers, and this should really be implemented in the mindset of people that vaccines prevent cancer. This is the best public health tool available today for prevention, primary prevention, before actually we get into all sorts of preventions that do not have the clinical set evaluated. So this is what I wanted to show, to say, and also sharing the recent news. I was actually shot by BBC recently, but we have the real world evidence that the vaccination can actually cut the infection, the cancer's rate of cervical cancer by 90%, as was actually expected from the clinical trials. But some stage you have to actually implement your vaccination program in real life and really hope that what you've seen in the clinical trials is what you're going to get in reality. And we basically walk the talk. So we did talk the walk about the value of vaccination against HPV, for instance, and we see that by walking the talk, when you implement appropriately a program like it is in the UK, well shared, thank you very much, Peter, we actually can walk towards elimination of those cancers. And another key word actually that needs to be mentioned is this elimination concept. So it's unique. It's unique in public health to have this ability to eliminate a disease, to eliminate potentially cancers. Two big plans supported by WHO, and we have today the one supported by Europe, is about eliminating hepatitis B and hepatitis C related infectious diseases and cancers, and the elimination of HPV-related cancers. So this is just a tremendous ambition that needs everybody's engagement to achieve to this elimination target. So if I will move very quickly, I wanted to give the big picture. I mean, cancers in general, without going into the HPV specifically right now, but cancers in general in Europe, it's 2.7 million new cases. And it's about 1.3 million of deaths. So cancers is a huge burden in Europe. And for this reason, it has to be prevented where we can prevent it. And interestingly enough, cancers is gender equitable. So it's actually affecting both men and women, disrespecting the type of cancers. They all have their own specificities depending on the gender, but men and women are actually affected by the risk of cancers. And when we deep dive a little bit more with regards to our aim today, what is vaccines preventable cancers, we look at HPV. We've seen, and it's been presented by the other speaker, so I won't get too much into the details, but indeed HPV is actually a risk of cancers for women, well-known cervical cancer, because this has been the first one evaluated also by the vaccines. But we know, and we have all the evidence about the risk of HPV in men, with all the cancers related for men, and the impact of those cancers in both genders. And when we look at the incidence for the countries, I mean, this has been presented by Marina already, so I won't get into that again, but there is a huge discrepancy within Europe, between western part of Europe and eastern part of Europe. And in terms of incidence rates, the eastern part of Europe is much more hit by the incidence of cervical cancer specifically, but it's similar for the other type of HPV-related cancers compared to the western part of Europe. And when we look at where we are at with vaccination, vaccination is in general not specific to HPV, in fact, and there is a huge fragmentation in vaccination programs across Europe. You have as many national immunization programs that you have actually member states in the European Union. So it is not easy. The fragmentation is not easy, notably when viruses have no borders, and basically if a country is not well protected, people traveling, viruses traveling, does impact the neighboring or beyond the neighbor other countries. So huge fragmentation in Europe with regards to vaccination policies, which is also reflected when we look at HPV vaccination per se. And there is a significant gap in vaccination coverage rates. I'm really glad the data that I've got here for Czech Republic, Slovakia, Bulgaria, and Hungary are coming from WHO. They are out from 2020, so maybe not up to date. We had up to date data presented by for Hungary. But what is showing here is a huge discrepancy in terms of coverage rates. You have countries that provide vaccination for HPV vaccination for girls only in Europe. This is the countries marked in dark blue. You have countries that actually provide vaccination for boys and girls, that's the light green. And you have countries that still do not have national immunization program for HPV, like it can be in Poland, where the vaccination is available in private only. So this is quite an issue if we want to protect the youngest population, but not only against HPV-related cancers. And this is really when we look at those coverages, even in the best performing countries like Hungary, we are still far from the targets, the elimination targets set by the WHO last year in the elimination plan, with 90% of girls fully vaccinated with the HPV vaccines by the age of 15, which has been taken back by the European Commission in its EU Beating Cancer Plan. So if I move a little bit away from HPV, if you allow me, I go a little bit on hepatitis B. We have a big challenge. I mean, the hepatitis B is even a bigger concern because vaccination has been available for much longer than HPV. And there is also an elimination goal there that has never been achieved so far. So there is a recent report from the CDC related to 2020 where things are at with regards to the progress towards elimination of hepatitis B and C. But here what is of concern for vaccination is hepatitis B. So there are clear challenges. Data suggests that we still have 9 million of Europeans actually that live with chronic hepatitis B and C. Half of that related to hepatitis B, which is really a significant burden and translates into liver cancers at the end. And the report really highlights the gaps in prevention programs with suboptimal HPV vaccination coverage rates across the European and the economic area, European economic area regions. So a lot of work to be done, and this is of concern because once again, this translates into mortalities that could be prevented, and very little progress is being seen with regards to how to reach the elimination target by 2030. So when we move to the EU Beating Cancer Plan, clearly this is a unique opportunity that we will have in Europe to eliminate vaccines-preventable cancers, HPV and hepatitis B. It's a tremendous opportunity that every country should actually seek in terms of support. The EU Beating Cancer Plan, I mean, there's been a tremendous work done over the last years and to ensure that it will include vaccination, and it does include vaccination as a means of prevention, supporting the elimination goal of WHO, by the way, related to HPV. So with a target to be reached for the girls of 90%, but also ensuring the enlargement of access to vaccination for boys as well by 2030. So a quite ambitious plan that, if to be implemented, needs to have the strong support of the EU member states. what is important is that this plan is going to be supported with funds coming from the EU. So an opportunity for the member states to benefit from these funds to reach the elimination target. So just, I would have, actually, I don't want to do the job of the European Commission here, but as I haven't seen them connected, I just use the opportunity to cover a little bit this European funding opportunity via the initiative of EU for Health of the European Commission, which has been set up also to benefit from the lessons learned as well from the pandemic and how to build resilience healthcare systems. And as part of that, so they released a 5.3 billion envelope over the 2021-2027 period, 20% of which is going to be dedicated to prevention. And EU Beating Cancer Plan has clearly his place as part of this EU for Health work program. So this is where every country's and civil society, NGOs, can actually find the opportunity to connect with projects that can actually work on dedicated active projects for HPV vaccination campaign or other type of activities that support the elimination target. Just looking at 2021, for instance, there has been 3.8 million direct grants that has been given to member states for HPV vaccination campaign, for example, and notably for those countries with very low vaccination coverage rates, and 1.2 million in grants for civil society and NGOs to reach the same goal. So for those who, just to show the platform that is actually taking care, managing all those funding projects is the European Health and Digital Executive Agency, and where calls are published to be able to actually submit project proposal. And
thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms.
Just going to finish, if you don't mind.
Of course.
Thank you very much. So the last thing is related to the immediate actions that policy stakeholders can take to support the efforts toward the elimination of vaccine-preventable cancers. I think what has been seen today is we need funding. I mean, it's the nerf de la guerre, as we say in French. Funding is critical. So the EU Beating Cancer Plan is a good funding platform to initiate relevant activities, but not only. The member states need to really dedicate sustainable funding to their immunization programs, including HPV, of course. They have to have as a strategy and objective a life course approach. So vaccination should not be seen as a value for pediatrics only. It has to be seen as a value for the life course with adolescent, adult, and older adult, meaning that the services, the access that needs to be provided to the population need to be adapted to that population. We've seen that for an adolescent, for example, is much more easy to reach them at school, to provide vaccination at school than in pediatrics. And for adults, it is the same. You may benefit from vaccination in pharmacies, for example, to make the access simple, easy, and convenient for the population. So improving access to routine immunization services through expanded delivery services is critical, and COVID-19 provided a lot of solutions in that regard that should be seen as sustainable. Strengthening immunization data system is also very, very important. We don't have actually the coverage rate data for all the countries in a timely manner, and they are sometimes reported fairly late with like 1 year or 2 year delay, which is not enough to run the relevant policy measures in case of low vaccination coverage rates or crisis of following a vaccine hesitancy issue. So timely monitoring is critical. Having electronic registries to collect vaccination coverage rates is really, really important. And the member states should really prioritize this also as an opportunity. And last but not least, is about building trust and confidence in vaccination. There has been a lot of questions raised in that regard. There has been really good example from Hungary and Sweden on how they actually managed to to secure high vaccination coverage rates in adolescents and HPV. There are good lessons learned as well from Ireland. We had to go through, and Denmark actually, we had to go through a HPV hesitancy crisis as well and managed to bounce back from those crises. And I think creating a pan-European platform for countries to exchange good practices, best practices, evidence, policy recommendation, public health policies, solutions would be of great support as well to leverage what works and to gain time in putting in place solutions. I pause here. Thank you very much.
Looking for this really in-depth overview of what's possible and also particularly of the funding opportunities provided by the European Union, because obviously these will be key for any kind of meaningful change. But in your presentation, you also mentioned the lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. So in your opinion, do you think that COVID vaccination centers could potentially be leveraged for other immunization programs, for example, even for the HPV vaccination program?
I think this is really country specific, honestly. It all depends where the COVID-19 vaccination centers has been put in place. If you ask me, I had to actually take my car with 40 minutes drive to get to my COVID-19 vaccination center to be vaccinated. Mm-hmm. I don't think this would be really I won't call it convenient access outside the pandemic, honestly. And it does actually require significant resources. So you dislocate actually your healthcare providers potentially. If you manage to have additional healthcare providers, this is even better. But it depends on the country setting. It depends how things were actually organized. If the vaccination center is at hospital in dedicated health environment within city center, it might be much more convenient. In that case, why not, if it is easily accessible? What we've seen in terms of other solutions as well, you had the COVID-19 vaccine center, but you also had access pharmacists, nurses, all healthcare providers that becomes legitimate actually to vaccinate. And this was just, there should not be any barriers between the healthcare system, within the healthcare system, to deliver information and access to vaccination. This is a primary prevention public health tool. So all healthcare providers in contact with citizens and patients should be equipped with the relevant training and opportunity to deliver this information and potentially vaccination. So this is true at all stages of life. Once again, it's not specific to teenagers, mm-hmm. but it has to be, there is no reason why if you have diabetes, you have to change your doctors to have access to a pneumo or an influenza vaccines, for example. Your diabetes that is following diabetologist that is following you on a regular basis should be the one providing you the access to this, to what is relevant for you as vaccination. And this is even true for the teenagers, obviously. So pharmacists, a great example, and sometimes you have fights between the different sectors, but a good example in Spain, for example, where pharmacists at the end provide vaccination, and the vaccination is done by nurses at the pharmacy. So there is a way to get organized to ensure that it is easy for the people to be vaccinated. They just have to go where it is the most convenient for them, and it is to the system to organize adequately and really take away any barriers that are not legitimate to access vaccination.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And for our final presentation, we'll return to Slovakia because we know that we have quite a few things to fix here in terms of improving the HPV vaccination rate. So I'll let Associate Professor Kalajová speak now.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all. First of all, thank you for inviting me because listening all those very interesting ideas and experiences for sure will move our action forward. So I would like very briefly to share a message from the national authority with you from the Ministry of Health. Cancer is one of the major public health problems affecting our society. It's public health problem. I'm representing the Department of Public Health Screening and Prevention, and the Slovak Republic is committed to improve the organization, management, and the provision of health services in the framework of the fight against cancer through action plans, because we know from the knowledge that it is very well known what to do, but sometimes the problem is how to do. WHO highlights that even countries have an existing policy strategy or action plan for cancer, only 70% reported the plans were being implemented. So we would like to highlight that we are aware that implementation is really important to be covered. Controlling cancer in Slovakia requires also the investment of substantial resources and the effective coordination at the national level. And we are aware, and we would like to highlight that there are still notable performance gaps and lack of continuation in the cancer control plan operating in the Slovak Republic. And we know that turn is on our side. National Cancer Plan and updated action plans in Slovakia has been approved by our government in July this summer. And the action plans are focusing on prevention, early detection, diagnosis, treatment, and improved quality of life for cancer patients. And the timeline for our updated action plans is 21 to 25. Action plan number 1, focus on prevention. We have activity 2.2 there, and the simple aim is to increase the percentage of girls and boys vaccinated against HPV. What I would like to introduce to my colleagues that we are in line, and we would like to be in line with European Commission initiatives. And we decided as national authority to join to direct grant to member states titled Support to Assist Member States to Roll Out Large-Scale Human Papillomavirus Vaccination Campaigns. And the general objective of this joint action among member states countries is to support EU efforts to improve HPV vaccine uptake by strengthening joint efforts amongst member states in order to reduce the incidence and mortality of cervical and other cancers caused by HPV. Mandatory work packages for us are, of course, the technical work packages, coordination and management, dissemination, evaluation, integration in national policies, what is very important from our perspective, and sustainability. There is a lot of work to be done in the future, and there are thematic work packages, monitoring of HPV vaccination in member states, and improving HPV vaccination awareness. And this is a crucial, the involvement of the case stakeholders, national institution, national expert, representatives of the target groups and patients association, media representatives, association of health professionals. And the next work package we would like to join is the training in vaccine communication. And we are just at the beginning because we are just drafting the future project. So I would like to highlight that we are aware there is a window of opportunity for Slovakia for sustainable synergies to bridge the research, policy, and practice gap. And with a comprehensive approach to prevent, screen, and treat, cervical cancer can be eliminated as a public health problem widely. And that if we know effective primary prevention, HPV vaccination, and secondary prevention approaches as screening and treating precancerous lesions, there is our must to prevent the most cervical cancer cases. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Associate Professor. Given that we have discussed the success story of these school vaccination programs, do you think that this is perhaps something that we should consider in terms of implementing our action plans in terms of HPV vaccinations?
Yes, I hope, and my hope is much bigger after the listening colleagues from other countries, that it is possible to improve when we will have a much more tailoring interventions in connection to place when we would like to vaccinate target group. So I really like the idea of the school-based vaccinated program for the future, also in Slovakia. And if Hungary, our neighbor, is able to implement that kind of approach, I hope so that Slovakia will be inspired by this case.
Fingers crossed. Such a hopeful message for the end of this webinar, which ran over. I apologize, but I think the presentations were super interesting. So I've learned a lot myself. Obviously, if you have any questions, feel free to send them to us, and we can then coordinate and send them forward to you so that we don't take up any more of your time. But I would really like to thank very much to all our speakers today. It's been a great pleasure moderating this discussion. And yeah, have a nice rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.